Hello, I'm Jenny Prisk, President and Founder of Voices of Women. We came together in San Diego after September 11 to explore how we, as global citizens, could promote women as leaders in a worldwide campaign for peace. Tonight, we bring you the third in a series of programs on global community and human security. Our topic is Iraq and the US elections. We'll hear first from Dr. Naba Salim Hamid. She is a biology professor at Baghdad University and the founder of New Horizons for Women in Iraq. Then a response from American Foreign Affairs columnist James Goldsborough. The speaker's remarks will be followed by a question and answer session with the audience. Please stay with us. Now, it's really my very, very great pleasure to introduce our very special speakers tonight. Our first guest speaker, who will address you for 20 minutes, is Dr. Naba Salim Hamid. And she is more than just a visitor from Baghdad now. Naba came to us first in 2004, and many of you may have heard her speak at this very venue and on this very stage, and you would have been very impressed by her words then. Since then, Naba has lived through the devastating war in Iraq, and she will tell you more about that. Naba has made her way into our hearts. She's living with one of our board members, Edith Fine, while she's in San Diego. And I was thinking back today of the occasion when I first met her, and Anne Rast and I, another board member, picked her up at the airport. We didn't know what she looked like, but we had a large sign that we waved frantically. And we brought her back to the Casa, the beautiful accommodation here at the IPJ. And we lay on the bed, the three of us, after 10 minutes of meeting, and talked about the world as though we'd known each other forever. And that really is how we must feel about the people of Iraq. They are our brothers and sisters. We have known them forever. They've been here longer than we have, and we owe them our attention. Dr. Hamid is an Iraqi scientist. She's an educator, she's a speaker, she's a women's rights and peace activist. She's just one wonderful woman. And in 2003, she founded New Horizons for Women, which is an NGO registered with the Iraqi Ministry of Planning and Development Cooperation. We're delighted to have you here again, Naba, and I'll bring you up in just a moment. I want to go ahead and introduce James Goldsborough. Jim is no stranger to many of you. You read him in the San Diego Union Tribune. You mourned his passing from the San Diego Union Tribune, and you were delighted to see his reincarnation at Voice of San Diego. So in case you haven't been able to find him recently, we know where he is, Voice of San Diego. He's also an honorary supporter of Voices of Women, which means that every time I call him and nag him, he says, yes, I'd be delighted to speak. And of course, tonight couldn't be more timely. Jim is an award-winning writer, as many of you know, with a 40-year career in journalism, specializing in foreign affairs. He was named the Edward R. Murrow Fellow at the Council on Foreign Relations, and he served as a director of European projects at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. And that, of course, is where we find one of our greatest connections with Jim. So first of all, it is my very great privilege to introduce to you Dr. Naba Salim Hamid. Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum, peace upon you. Regards and greetings to my dear friends. I'm thanking Voices of Women who invited me to this event, and the Kroc Institute who hosted us for tonight, and the TV team who are documenting and broadcasting what we are saying today. Probably some more people will hear it. I have been with you in this very room 15 months ago. Much has been happened since that time. I have thought hard about what I will say to you tonight. It is difficult. But my thoughts now come after the momentous changing tide of your Tuesday elections. I watch my friends here in the US react to your elections. I feel in my heart a mustard seed. A mustard seed, you know, it is hope for changing. James Goldsborough will talk of this after me. I will talk of my people now. This audience is unique. Some of you went against this war. You went for rallies and vigils, in rain, in cold, in boiling sun. I know this. You know things many Americans do not know. You read, discuss, worry. You know Iraqis are human beings. Tonight, my words are very critical. My speech is a mixture of suffering, pain, stress, anguish, compassion, and hope. Tonight, I need to share stories with your receptive ears. I am not used to put my speeches in writing. I speak from the bottom of my heart. But for tonight, I write my speech. I feel each thing I say to you is so important, and I do not want to miss any word I need to say. I ask you to see me tonight as a lens through which you can see not just one Iraqi woman, but 27 million Iraqi. To you, I look good. I have shower. I am clean. My clothes are neat. Do I look good? If I am in Baghdad, I will not be able to give this speech at this hour. There is no security at this time of the day, and probably is a curfew. We cannot gather together. I will not be able to look as good as I do now. No electricity, so no shower. Hard to wear clean clothes. Hard to look acceptable. Tonight, I will tell you some stories. If I tell you all the stories, I will go for hours talking, and I don't want to keep you that long. I will go for stories of what happened recently in Baghdad and other Iraqi cities. Here is one. One day, this past August, I was at my college. A strange man approached me. I thought he was asking for help, but I shocked when he said, "Why your hair is uncovered and you are wearing pants?" At that moment, I am very scared. Situation is terribly bad. Fundamentalism is growing. Gangs gain more power in the community. Terrorists are using religious interpretation very badly as an excuse to kill people. Extremists are very aware in Baghdad, disseminating flyers filled with words like this: do not drive car, do not wear bright colors, do not wear trousers, do not show with bare hair, cover your hair and your body or you will be killed. Here's a second one. Americans are doing inspections in many areas of Baghdad. The area where I live is one of them. Here is what happened this very Tuesday. They are looking for terrorists. The man we pay to guard our home while we are out of the country called to say that soldiers had dashed in the doors of our home and entered without permission. I call this terrorism. They have no respect for us. They don't wait for someone to open the home to them. I left all my belongings in my home. I don't know what has happened to them. When the soldiers left, they do not repair the doors. They left our home and many others that are empty on our street unsecured. Other news from this week. I received an email from a young female scholar. She is a board member of my organization, New Horizon for Women. She is very smart, very committed. She loves her work. She's very active in the community as well. She was screaming in this email, there is a genocide for scholars and professionals in Baghdad. Hundreds of scholars have been assassinated. More than this have left the country to save their lives and their families. This is not because any of those professionals is a Sunni or a Shia. What is happening in Iraq is draining brains and draining blood. Here is another one. The chief of police of Karbala, this is a city south of Baghdad, this week caught a group of men living in one of the hotels in the city. They had plans and CDs describing a bombing for 2 shrines, 2 of the most holy places in the city. If this will happen, it is like the Vatican in Rome being bombed. The 2 shrines contain the bodies of 2 grandsons of Prophet Muhammad, revered by all Muslims, not just for Shia, not just for Sunni. This means that what is happening in Iraq is not sectarian violence or sectarian fighting, it is terrorism. Somebody is getting benefit from segregating and dividing the country. You can label life in my country bad in all aspects. Bad security, bad economy, bad hygiene and healthcare, bad education, bad sanitation, bad water, bad air, bad streets, bad power, bad and expensive imported petrol and cooking gas, bad relations with neighboring countries, along with tens of thousands of bad guys, gangs and terrorists. My people live in misery and poverty, struggling for basic survival. They lack jobs and security. Educated people, the very ones who would rebuild our country, are now either being killed or forced to flee for their safety, and I am one of them. With the danger of kidnapping for ransom and abduction for organ trading, children are imprisoned in their homes. School buildings lie in ruins. Children have no playgrounds, no toys, no joy in their lives. Each day they live in uncertainty and fear. Iraq now is a very dangerous country, not only for foreigners, but for us Iraqis as well. So, after all that you have heard from me, I have a question for you. This war was to make Americans feel safer. Now, do you feel you are more safe, more protected in 2006 than you were in 2003? I doubt. Let me ask you again. How many of you have seen the movie Iraqi for Sale? I advise you to see it for those who haven't seen the movie, and judge my words after that. I would rather call it America for Sale. Major US corporations have done unimaginable damage. They made billions of dollars for themselves. They sold out your own troops, your children. They gave contaminated water with disease agent in it. Your troops, your children have serious diseases. And your soldiers are badly traumatized, affected by stress, fear, and despair. What happened in the past 4 years is a tragic, not only for Iraqi civilians, but for Americans as well. We both are victims. We both are losers. We both are in the same boat, the terrorist boat. We Iraqis lost blood, safety, and security. And America lost its credibility, honesty, accountability, and humanity. A lack of wisdom has trampled human rights in Iraq. A lack of wisdom is an abuse of power. I ask you to urge your leaders to be reluctant in using certain words. Words like this: we are looking for new strategies for victory in Iraq, or to win in Iraq, or to succeed in Iraq. For Iraqi civilians, these words are very wounding. In the minds of Iraqis, these words mean US is looking for victory over Iraqis, or US win and Iraqis lose, or US succeeded and Iraqis fail. Iraqis need to hear we work together, that there are new strategies and actions at government level and people's level to help Iraqis gain back their healthy, vibrant country. I urge your new leaders to demand vigorously for a new policy toward Iraq. And this is very important. Just as you do not want to listen only to your far right and far left, that you and your leaders listen to the majority, the neutral Iraqi civilians. What must now be done to meet their basic human needs, and what is required to fix the destruction made by America in Iraq. We need to promote reconciliation plans, ways for the US people and Iraqi people to know each other and work together, not just at high levels of politics and diplomacy. Although this is very important, but at the person-to-person level as well. We need to work together, women, men, all for peace building. No to silence, no to shame, yes to commitment, yes to action. I am a scientist, a biologist. I believe in living things, plants, animals, and humans. I see with my eyes and my mind what must be done to heal my country. I am a woman. I feel in my heart that my country can heal. I must feel this or I could not go on. I ask you to hear my words. I urge you tonight, go and think, meditate, sleep with my stories, and labor over them in your hearts. I have made a letter to you. Please take when you are at the door, when you leave. Then take your passion for peace and give it to others so that it may spread. We want to create an initiative that is like a wave. It washes over your land. It goes across oceans and continents until it reaches Iraq. We want it to be strong as light itself. If you feel it, I want you to be part of it. Through the difficult days ahead, I will never rest until we reach across to each other to build bridges of understanding. Thank you for hearing my words.
I am so honored to be part of this tonight, and so thankful to the Voices of Women and to the Institute of Peace and Justice. So honored to be on a program with a woman as determined and as brave as Naba Hamid. It's a moving experience. I met with Jenny and Naba last week, and they asked me what I thought was going to happen in the election, and I said, well, the polls say it looks like the House will go to the Democrats, but it would be a miracle if the Senate did. Well, we needed a miracle, and we got a miracle. When the Iraq War started 3.5 years ago, George Bush's neoconservative supporters praised him for a courageous decision. He was betting his presidency on the war, they said at the time. Tuesday, Bush lost his bet. In a midterm election, voters couldn't get to him, so they made his party pay. If ever there was a protest vote, this was it. This election, I think, was meant to bring Americans back together, back from the extremes where they've been for 6 years, back to the principles on which this country was built. Open and honest government, respect for the law, and leadership based, as John Quincy Adams once put it, on our good name and our good example. Under Bush, our nation is at a nadir. His policies have done serious damage to our interests, our reputation. We are less influential, less respected, and less secure. Hans Morgenthau, the wisest of our international policy scholars, once said this about foreign policy: never put yourself in a position from which you cannot retreat without face, and from which you cannot advance without undue risk. That is precisely the situation we are in. And voters punished it for it, punished Bush for it. 2 years too late, in my view. Iraq was the theme of this election, though there were many sub-themes, all related to the same flaws of government that got us into Iraq. Dishonesty, ignorance, secrecy, corruption, division. Above all, an arrogant failure to respect American traditions and the lessons of history. The election message was clear. In Iraq, change course. In responding to that message yesterday, if you happened to see Bush at his press conference, he was defiant. He would not accept defeat, he said. Quote, "We're not going to leave until the job is done," end quote. It's the same language Johnson and Nixon used in Vietnam, and we know how that turned out. Let us go back briefly over what has occurred over the last 3.5 years. The entire world warned Bush against this misadventure, but he listened only to the neoconservative sirens whispering in his ear, "Bring it on, bring it on." As a columnist who opposed this war, I remember well the war whooping in the spring of 2003. Do you know not one major newspaper in this country opposed this war? Not one. Where was the press? We of the newspaper industry ask ourselves why we don't sell newspapers anymore. Well, this might have been a good example. Why not? But the war whooping always goes on the eve of war, doesn't it? The trumpets sound, the drums roll, the flags wave. 3 years later, you don't see many little flags on the cars anymore. I used to see them all the time. But the war still goes on. The war's still out there. We may have gotten a little tired of the war, but it's still there, as Naba so eloquently told you, so movingly told you. 105 Americans died in Iraq last month. 1,289 Iraqi civilians died last month. After the eve of war always comes the reality of war. 2 years ago, when we gave Bush a second term, it's not that we didn't know the truth about this war. We knew then that it was a mistake and a failure, that Bush had hijacked the national consensus that grew up after 9/11 and put it at the service of his own private agenda. We knew all that. It gives none of us satisfaction to have been right about this war. We wish Iraqis had greeted us with candies and flour, that the war had ended as Bush said it did 3 months after it started, that democracy in Iraq was spreading its tentacles out wide and far over the Middle East and the entire region. We wish all that. But Bush was wrong, terribly, terribly wrong, and we the people cannot, must not excuse presidents and Congresses that are wrong about the most deadly of human enterprises, war. Bush's war is a monstrosity that has killed and maimed a generation of Iraqis every bit as much as World War I killed and maimed a generation of Europeans. Think about this war for a moment. Think about it. In war, never forgetting that war, in a place like this, I have to say this, is only morally acceptable, only morally and legally acceptable, as a last resort, in self-defense, when all else fails. There's a tendency in war to think about armies and not people. We do body counts in wars, hoping that more bodies accumulate on their side than on ours. That's victory. But body counts in Vietnam didn't bring victory. There were always more Vietnamese ready to die than there were Americans. Why wouldn't there be? It's their country. It would be the same if it were ours. Do you know that more people died in the American Civil War than in all other wars this country has ever fought put together? Why? Because it was our country. People will die to defend their country. That is a just cause. It helps to have people making war who know something about it. That's why Eisenhower keeps rising in the judgment of history. Serving sobers you up, makes you less willing to regard people as bodies instead of people, less willing to make war for reasons of vainglory. You cannot qualify war in harsher terms than I will, said General Sherman in his letter to the Confederates on the eve of Atlanta. War is cruelty, and you cannot refine it. And those who brought war into our country deserve all the curses and maledictions that a people can pour out. Sherman served. Eisenhower served. Bush, Cheney, the neocons, none of them served. Bush informs Colin Powell that he's going to war in Iraq, this is in the Woodward book, in the following terms. You know, I really think I'm going to have to take this guy out. Can you imagine for a moment Sherman or Eisenhower or Powell saying such a thing? Impossible. I pick a random story from the New York Times. Quote, the report says that 6,599 Iraqi civilians were killed during July and August, the highest numbers on record. Just a number in a newspaper. 6,599. Why not 16,599 or 6,599? Just a number in a newspaper. But every one of those people had a son or a daughter or mother or father or sister or brother who went through all the hells any one of us can imagine when the word came. How long does one mourn a lost child? How long before a parent forgets? How long before they understand that those who brought war into our country deserve all the curses and maledictions that people can pour out? Why do so many Americans still believe in this war? The polls and the elections said that 1 in 3 Americans still believe in this war. Knowing what they know, seeing what they see, how can they still be in denial? They may be Republicans, they may be patriots, they may be neocons for all I know, but they still have eyes and ears. They know, like the rest of us, that Iraq had no weapons of mass destruction, no ties to Al-Qaeda, no links to 9/11. They know, like the rest of us, that Bush lied about these things. They know, like the rest of us, that Iraq is a wreck. They know from the chief anti-terrorist expert Richard Clarke and from Britain's Downing Street memo that Bush always intended to go to war, that the UN consultations, the discussions, the votes, the inspections, all that was a charade, a facade, a grand guignol play put on to scare Americans. Yet a third of the country still believes, though our intelligence agencies tell us that the war has made the threat of terrorism worse and has made America less secure. What makes so many people unable to see the truth? In Vietnam, we stayed on 5 fruitless more years after 1968. 25,000 Americans and 500,000 Vietnamese died during those years to provide a fig leaf for the vanities of Henry Kissinger and Richard Nixon. And Kissinger advises Bush on Iraq. Is it a fatal flaw in our character that keeps so many in denial? Arrogance, hubris, naivete? Do we live in a fantasy world unable to see reality? Reporter Ron Siskin in the New York Times magazine quotes a Bush official telling him that while most people live in a reality-based world, the White House, quote, creates its own reality, end quote. We see today that many neocons are changing their minds. My colleagues, the neocon columnists in particular. The problem, they say, wasn't the war, it was the war's execution. Bush wasn't wrong, no, it was Rumsfeld's fault, or the military's fault, or the civilian administrators. We didn't know the occupation would be botched, they say. We didn't know there would be rake-offs and payoffs and scandals and profiteering and double bookkeeping and all that stuff. We didn't know that. To these people I say, that makes you twice wrong. It wasn't the war's execution that was wrong. It wasn't the military or the civilian administrators. It was the idea itself. We're not up to our necks in it in Iraq because of poor execution. We're up to our necks in it because the war was doomed from the beginning. Doomed for being based on false assumptions and dubious principles. 2 years ago in this very same room, I was part of the centennial celebration for Hans Morgenthau. What made Morgenthau's work unique was his application of scientific tools of analysis to international politics. He first applied his analysis to Vietnam. Failure, he wrote in 1965, when the war was still a popular cause, would result not from defects of personality or errors of execution, but from false assumptions and dubious principles. The establishment of a conceptual framework built on an understanding of the lessons of history and national interests would expose such false assumptions and dubious principles before they could be put into action. History is to the nation as memory is to the individual. Anyone grounded in history knew that the war in Iraq, the brutal, hostile, colonial invasion and occupation of an ancient nation that had done us no harm, would fail. War opponents weren't guessing about Iraq any more than Morgenthau was guessing about Vietnam. None of us liked Saddam Hussein any more than we'd liked Ho Chi Minh. But we had a pretty good idea, as did Bush the father, and Scowcroft, and Baker, and Powell, and all those generals who spoke out, that invading and occupying Iraq was a really bad idea. That trying to impose democracy on a country by bombing it to smithereens probably wouldn't work any better in Iraq than it had in Vietnam. We will be leaving Iraq. 2/3 of Americans wants a timetable for military withdrawal. That was the message in Tuesday's election. Polls also showed that 3/4 of Iraqis want foreign troops out within a year, and that 3/4 of American troops in Iraq want out within a year. These views are consistent with the intelligence reports about our presence serving as a catalyst for more violence. But Bush said yesterday he won't accept defeat, echoing what Johnson and Nixon said in Vietnam. The strangest thing about that press conference yesterday, if you watched it as I did, was how Bush kept coming back to the Iraq study group, the James Baker study group. I listened to that and I had two thoughts about that. The first one, which I concede is cynical, is that this administration has reached a point of such complete fecklessness and confusion that Bush can only pin his hopes once again on the family fixer, James Baker, the man who made him president in Florida in 2000. Whatever the study group may say, the only voice Bush should be listening to right now is the voice on Tuesday, the people's voice. And that voice was loud and clear. It isn't working in Iraq, change course. My second thought about Bush's references to his friend the fixer is slightly more sanguine. If Bush needs a fig leaf, if he's looking for a fig leaf, a decent interval, we called it in Vietnam, for leaving Iraq, and Baker can give him one, well, whatever works. As we learned in Vietnam, victory and defeat are often a matter of definition. The goal in Iraq is to achieve an honorable withdrawal, one that turns Iraq back to the Iraqis. We need a process of simultaneous consultation and disengagement. As consultations progress, the first U.S. troops will come out. We should state clearly that it is our intention to have all troops out, not necessarily in America, but in the region, as Jack Murtha has so wisely explained, by the end of next year. We should help organize a conference of interested nations, all interested nations, including ones Bush doesn't like. Iran, you might have noticed, said this week it wants to talk to us about Iraq. which would seem like a good idea, but we don't talk to Iran. It will be up to Iraqis to determine the shape of their nation, whether it will be centralized or federal, or remain a unitary state at all. The talk in this country of splitting Iraq into separate parts is just more hubris. Neither a majority of Iraqis nor any of Iraq's neighbors wants to see the disintegration, and in any case, it's a matter for Iraqis, not for Washington. Our partial redemption will be in providing the economic help needed to rebuild what we have destroyed. However much it may cost, it will be less than we spend on the war, which is $200 million per day. 3 years ago, Bush's chief economic advisor was fired for saying that war would cost $200 billion. We've already passed that. His firing was a perfect example of the fatal flaw of this administration, thinking it could deny history, deny facts, create its own reality. It was the flaw that led to failure in Iraq. It was the flaw that led to Tuesday's results. The neocons, it turns out, were right about only one thing. Bush did bet his presidency on Iraq. Thank you.
James, if I may ask you, you sort of poignantly but facetiously talked about the third of Americans who still don't seem to get it. Could you just speak more directly to what you think the basis of that ignorance, I guess, would be? Why is it that a third of us don't seem to see the truth like the rest of us do?
Stephen Decatur, his famous quote, "My country, right or wrong." There was actually more to that quote. It goes, "My country, right or wrong, but my country." And the two thoughts are completely different. I think some people believe if it's our war, it has to be a good war. And they'll always believe that. Whereas what Stephen Decatur was trying to say, if you say my country, right or wrong, you could say, you know, if it's our war, it's a good war. But if you say my country, right or wrong, but my country, what you're saying is that when my country it makes a mistake, you have to stand up and fight against it. So I think there's too many Americans, too many people in the world, and this happens in every country, the French, the Germans, they all felt this during the world wars. If it's our war, it has to be a good war. And I think what we've learned in this country, and it probably started with Vietnam, is that there are good wars and bad wars. And you have to decide, and when you really are convinced that a war is a bad war, you have to go out and explain to the knee-jerk patriots why this isn't necessarily a good war.
I'm an Iraqi American, and I am absolutely disgusted, heartbroken over what's happened to my country. And I thank you, Doctor, so much for coming in and speaking the truth here today. Recently, we heard that 655,000 Iraqis have died since the U.S. invasion and occupation, and that's just an unbelievable number. My understanding from speaking to my relatives and virtually every single Iraqi I know is that Iraqis, by and large, want the U.S. to leave immediately. The overwhelming majority sees no benefit whatsoever coming from this occupation and wants it to end tomorrow. You said, rather than looking at things in a success of Americans versus failure of Iraqis, that we should be working together towards the success of the government in Iraq. But I really don't see what role the U.S. would play in any Iraqi success. You know, try as hard as I might, I don't see what the benefit would be of any U.S. continued involvement in Iraqi politics. Can you speak to that?
Well, the presence of America in Iraq today, it is part of the problem and part of the solution. I can't find any other solution. Probably you can help me to find something to say. Now Iraq, after 3.5 decades under Saddam Hussein, a horrible dictatorship, deprivation, Iraq frozen at 1990 after the Gulf War with the sanctions put on Iraq, everything suspended at that time. Iraq, after the 3.5 years under the occupation of US, lost more of power and capability. The troops and the police they are training now, they are hardly protect themselves. They are not trained. 2 weeks training for a policeman to be a professional and to protect and do his duty is a joke. The kind of armament they give to troops and police is a very old-fashioned arms. But still, America has a commitment to repair and to fix, because we Iraqis now are helpless. I am talking about civilians. Now Iraq like a body without immunity. No laws, no strong government, no military, no police, no neighbors have passion toward Iraqis to help them. It is chaos. It is a problem. But what I am talking about, the change happened in this country during the past 2 days, should bring some change on politics level, and on people level. US people is very important to build this bridge to cross to Iraqis. The problem in Iraq is hatred now toward America, toward people, even toward themselves. Why this happened to us? Despair. We need to fix little of that, to raise hope in them that you can work together, and then we can continue. We don't need volunteers. We are skilled, we are professionals, we are smart, we are enlightened, but at the beginning it is difficult. We have to cross this line of stress and deprivation. So it is, in my opinion, there is no solution. We have to work together. And those who raise their voices in Iraq, and it's shown on a newspaper that this number of Iraqis, this percentage of Iraqis calling for America to leave immediately, I say this is not the neutral Iraqis. Those who get benefit of troops to leave, no arm against their arms, are the terrorists, the former military and security, Saddam's men, Al-Qaeda men, those coming across the borders. They wait for this day. Iraqis will be a prey under those parties.
And our final question is from one of our peacemakers, Rebecca from Sudan.
As one of the peacemakers, the presentations we have been doing here, I realized that there is lack of flow of information from other countries of conflict. When I talked about my country, I found people lack a lot of information. I want to bring about the issue of media. For both of you, the question, what can be done with regards to American media to give correct, direct, true information to the public so that they don't stick to the information they get from channels that do not help them to understand clearly the situation in Iraq? What can be done? Then what can also be done in Iraq to help the media to assist in peace building and go across the bridges that you mentioned so that the two countries can engage in peace by using proper media channels with accurate information and facts. Thank you.
Unfortunately, media are very biased and hardly to find a neutral media channel now. I feel we people, we can do something. With our commitment and our work, we can use some media channels, even if we pay money for that, to broadcast, because it is money. Media is money now. Media is economy. Media is another face for war, another face for weapon. And we can counterpart them and use media in a peaceful way to envoy our messages. And this is actually what I have in my mind to work on this project. To use media to envoy messages from US at the beginning to Iraqis, because I'm sure Iraqis won't accept to communicate now with Americans, because they don't know your faces. You are the civilians. They know your troops, your Marines. They know Bush and the administration. And this is the only image they have in their minds. I'm sure they won't like to communicate with troops or with administration. You have to put some effort to help this campaign to grow and develop and cross, as I said, the continents to reach Iraqis. I'll do my best and put all my efforts and energy to bring this to life. This is one of the ways I have in my mind to use media for building the bridges. Otherwise, we have no power to control media. If I am alone or few people, we cannot. But by unity and solidarity, and when we put our hands together, we can do it.
This is a complicated subject. Let me start off by saying that war is the hardest thing to cover there is for the media, the fog of war that exists more for the media than it probably does for the armies. And it gets harder and harder to cover wars. Truth is still the first casualty of war. There wouldn't have been a First World War. It would have stopped if the people had known what was going on the Marne and on the Somme and at Verdun. They didn't know. They couldn't, the reporters couldn't go with the troops, and if they did find out the truth, and if they wrote it, they would have been shot. So nobody knew the millions of people that were dying for the advance of 20 or 30 meters. We changed that in Vietnam, and we found out the truth. We found out that governments will always lie, so the only way to find out the truth is to go off on your own, and that's why we were able to stop the war in Vietnam when the government wanted, if you remember, Westmoreland was asking Johnson for more and more troops, because a few more troops and we could have won. You know, it's the same thing that John McCain is saying in Iraq. Just give us a few more troops and we can win. It's the question of how do you define victory? It's sort of like Napoleon in Moscow. Here I am, what do I do now? I mean, that's the problem. So that's problem number one, that war is tough to cover, and in Iraq, everybody's in the green zone. Nobody even knows about the rest of the country, so nothing is known. No reporter dares go outside the green zone unless he's escorted by 1,000 Humvees. So it's very difficult to know the truth of Iraq. It's easier to hear someone like Naba Hamid tell us the truth than it probably is over there, where everyone is inside the green zone, that all the reporters at least. But that's problem number one. The problem number two is we don't have the coverage we used to have. Now, I happen to be older than I look, but I can tell you, I've been in this a long time, and Jenny mentioned I was Edward R. Murrow Fellow. I'm not that old, but I did know some of his colleagues, and I knew I was in Europe and in those areas at the time when all of the networks had great reporters over there. Not just the television networks, but the radio networks. And all of the newspapers had their own person. And there was no chance that the Chicago Tribune or the Baltimore Sun or the New York Daily News, not to mention the New York Times or the LA Times, the San Francisco Chronicle, the Boston Globe, all of these people had their man in Paris and their man in Bonn and their man in Rome and their man in London. None of that anymore. We don't cover those places anymore. I mean, there's no news in those places anymore. And if there is news, everybody's based in London, so they fly in from London, they don't speak the language, and they go home at the end of the weekend. So that's the trouble of foreign news. In addition, the problem number 3 is we don't have as many great newspapers anymore. We have the New York Times and the Washington Post, and that's it. That's it, period. The Los Angeles Times used to be a great newspaper, but it's been destroyed by the Chicago people, who are being destroyed themselves by their stockholders. The Wall Street Journal has great reporters, but they concentrate on economic news, and they've got the most dishonest editorial page that I've ever seen in any country in 40 years in this business. Totally dishonest. And if you go to places like the Columbia Journalism Review, they'll give you chapter and verse of the lies and distortions. I mean, it's almost like Fox News. You just can't believe anything. So that's the third problem. The only way you're going to get the news, or the closest you're going to get to the truth about the news, is depending on the great reporters that the New York Times and the Washington Post have, and they put in Iraq. There's restrictions on those reporters, but they do the best they can, and that's as close as we're going to get to the news. The networks don't do it. The bloggers don't do it. I mean, they're good on opinion, but they don't have reporters. It's the great newspapers, the few great newspapers that are left, and there's fewer and fewer every day, every hour almost. Those are the best sources of news. And the least you can say of provincial fading newspapers in the provinces is that they do take those news services. And so you do get the New York Times, Washington Post, LA Times news service. Even if you don't take those newspapers, you get it through their syndicates taken through the provincial newspapers.
It's come to that time of the evening when the first thing and the most important thing for me to do at the moment is for all of us to express our profound respect and gratitude to Dr. Hamid and to James Goldsborough for the education and for the enlightenment and the elucidation about the facts tonight. Would you please do that? Voices of Women is very grateful to the Westreich Foundation for the generous underwriting that made this program possible. I'm Jenny Prisk. Thank you for joining us. Good night.